Hello and welcome to another episode of Community Update. Matthew Byard is your host today.
Collins Ellison is an advocate for housing support in Halifax. He's the founder of a grassroots organization, Housing as a Human Right. He recently spoke at a meeting for the Halifax Board of Police Commissioners where he talked about some of his work, and he's here today to talk about some of his work. Collins, thank you for joining us. Now, I think I got most of that right, and I know there's much more we can get into about it. You put a direct connection between housing and income inequality amongst Black, Native, and other racialized people. You make a direct connection between that and an overrepresentation of those same, Black, First Nations, and racialized people in the local jail and prison system. Is that correct?
That's right, yeah. Through the research that I've done, a lot of it is publicly available through novascotia.ca's website. But the numbers show, generally speaking, that persons of African descent make up about 15% of the prison population, or jail population, as it were. Mm-hmm. And they also make up about 15% of persons who are found to have been experiencing homelessness within the Kjipuktuk, otherwise known as Halifax region.
Versus in Halifax, you say the overall population is lower than 5%, I think you said, right?
Yeah, so for persons of African descent within Kjipuktuk, the population, based on Statistics Canada, information is less than 4%.
So you said that a lot of this information is publicly available, but I thought that some of your gripe, if you will, is that some of the information isn't available in terms of housing and income inequality. That information isn't available, but you say if it were, people could more readily make the direct connection to the disparities. Is that correct? I don't want to put words in your mouth.
No, yeah, that's right. So for the Department of Community Services, which a lot of persons who are experiencing homelessness are dependent on provincial benefits, and I would say that directly ties into like the income assistance program, for instance. The demographic data for DCS clientele is not made publicly available, and I don't even believe it's currently being collected. Although some folks that I've spoken with within the diversity and equity division of the DCS have suggested that they've started collecting child welfare demographics or clientele involved with child welfare. But again, for disability support clients, income assistance clients, we don't have those figures publicly available just quite yet.
And so I guess a skeptical person might ask, if that information, well, I guess two-part question, why isn't that information made available? And if it isn't, how can you make that connection?
Well, I don't think it's being collected as of yet. Same with information on public housing. Like if we are able to look into the demographic data of who's being served by public housing, I think we can make a clear connection of where public funds are being invested into and where the funds should be invested into.
So I guess why not collect it? What would be the advantage in not collecting it? Do you think from any government?
Well, I'm not so sure, but I think, or a cynic in me would suspect that it might bear out what we already know to be true anecdotally, and that is persons of African descent, persons of Indigenous descent are over-policed and over-represented within the jail systems, and that it's a choice by the governments. In many cases.
That's a big statement to say it's a choice. But so you're saying though that Black and Native people overrepresented in being unhoused, experiencing homelessness and things of that nature? Are they overrepresented in terms of low income rates?
Yeah, I would suspect that a lot of persons who are experiencing homelessness, again, being dependent on provincial benefits, that there's a clear connection there between what government actually is investing in. Again, I'll compare that to what they're spending in terms of incarceration here in a moment too. But for persons experiencing homelessness, based on the point in time count for the HRM from 2022, and also based on some recently available data from the by names list, that's these two pieces of information, these two statistics are available on the Affordable Housing Association of Nova Scotia's website. That's the main organization within Halifax or Kjipuktuk, working with the federal government through Reaching Home. That's Canada's homelessness strategy. And so their numbers even bear out that the persons experiencing homelessness 15% of those persons are of African descent. And again, the number is even higher for persons of indigenous descent, about 20%. And yeah.
And you shared with me some statistics that it says here, according to this, people with disabilities and health issues are also overrepresented. Overrepresented is in terms of homelessness.
Yeah.
It says 63% with mental health challenges, 59% with substance use, 37% physically disabled, 36% learning or cognitive delays, and 22% a brain injury after birth. How did you come across some of this information? Why do you do this work?
So this is information that has been collected through the 2022 point in time count that was done by a collection of nonprofits and organizations working within Shiboktuk that directly deal with persons experiencing homelessness. And so these are the numbers that they had found.
And these numbers, I guess it said they change frequently.
Yes. So the point in time count, as it differs from the by name list, it doesn't collect all of the information for everyone experiencing homelessness. This is just a 1 day count. So out of 586 people that they counted experiencing homelessness that day, these are the numbers that were borne out in terms of people who identify as being of African descent or of indigenous descent, or persons again who are dependent on provincial benefits, or who are identify as having a disability. So these are the numbers that are born through this point in time count, but it's not to suggest as though these are the total figures. I think maybe a more accurate kind of description of the rates of homelessness might be born through the by names list, which again is a weekly updated list that is again available on the AHANS website.
And you yourself identify as a person of African descent, correct?
I do, yes.
So with all this work, how did you get started? I mean, you started your own grassroots organization, Housing as a Human Right. You don't do this work through any other organizations, not through a political party? Are you connected to a political party? It's not political for you, it's just... No,
it was really born through a situation that I'd experienced a few years ago where I was in need of housing support. And I came to understand that there aren't really many pieces of accessibility available within the city. And so what I intended on doing when I first created this Housing as a Human Right this advocacy organization is just to advocate for this better accessibility piece. So one thing I've been trying to vie for is a centralized intake, similar to what they have in Toronto.
And what does that mean, centralized intake?
So central intake in Toronto is for persons who are experiencing homelessness or who are at risk of experiencing homelessness, or even persons who are just finding themselves in inadequate housing. It is a toll-free line available within the city of Toronto that you can call, and they will provide you the most accessible resources or direct you to the most accessible resources. So rather than what we have currently in the city here of Halifax, where a person experiencing homelessness might have to call several different lines, and that's even to suggest that they're able to get through. A lot of these lines won't be able to direct them as to where they can go for help. And so I think it would be much easier if a person in that type of emergency situation were to have an emergency type service where they can call, again, just one line and be directed to exactly where they need to go.
All right. And so recently you spoke at the, I want to word it right, the meeting of the Halifax Board of Police Commissioners, is that correct? What were you there to talk about? How does this work correlate with that?
Yeah, so I was at the Board of Police Commissioners meeting on February 7th, and again, the police, the Halifax Regional Police are requesting a budget increase of about $6 million. And I was there to highlight to the board that persons experiencing homelessness are over-criminalized. And exactly as I suggested, again, through some of these figures, the criminalization of this particular group, there's an overrepresentation of African persons of African descent and persons of indigenous descent. So I wanted to let the board know that if they're really keen on supporting the public, and that is their mandate, that they should be investing more into housing-related supports. Because again, we know that these are the groups that are have been marginalized and are underrepresented.
Yeah. Now, we had a discussion before we started recording here where you said, I guess, crime rates locally have gone up. I suggested that that may be evidence to support a budget increase for the police, but you say that's not the case?
Well, no, I think that in terms of crime rates, there's anecdotally speaking, a connection to be made between the cost of living and the crime rates. So if persons are not having their key needs met, i.e. food, housing, then it's likely that they're going to be committing more crimes out of desperation.
So anecdotally speaking, you're saying this is where likely the crime is rising and people, shoplifting. I don't want to put words in your mouth, but is that what we're seeing? You're saying, or?
Yeah, I believe that is the case. I believe it's the case where just the cost of living is it's unaffordable to people, and we don't see enough investments being made from various levels of government into various programs that actually go to, again, meet people at their base needs.
Yeah. Now we are seeing, I mean, if you drive around Halifax, we do see a lot of housing developments being built. One could argue that they are working on.
Well, I think from what I've found, the bit of research that I've done into this topic, investments into public housing in particular, they've been basically non-existent since the 90s, when the federal government just kind of rolled back their housing strategy in terms of investing into public housing. As to the particular reasons, as to the particular reasons why the federal government decided to just stop investing into public housing, I'm not entirely sure. But what I do know is that in terms of investments into public housing in the most recent years, that there are basically nowhere near the levels that would support actually what's needed, what's necessary in terms of growing population, in terms of, again, the rising cost of living. So when we're seeing investments being made into housing, again, often those are rates that are unaffordable and unattainable to people.
Well, they're saying that a lot of these investments are being put into what's called affordable housing. It might not be public housing, but it's at least affordable. You say that's not all it seems?
Yeah, no, I think there's a key distinction to be made between affordable housing and public housing, as affordable is generally speaking based on market rate. And so when we're looking at affordable, those definitions could vary, but typically speaking, they're about maybe 80% of going market rate could be considered affordable. And again, for clientele of the Department of Community Services, which is responsible for not only child welfare, but the Employment Support and Income Assistance Program and the Disability Support Program. These figures that are provided to these clientele in terms of income support rates, they're not, I believe, going to be able to meet the threshold of what the government may consider affordable housing.
So what maybe should they be doing that they're not doing, in your opinion? You're saying they're not doing enough?
Yeah, absolutely. I don't think it's.
I mean, they say Rome wasn't built in a day. I mean, you can't expect it to be fixed overnight, or should we? So?
Well, and in terms of investments into the types of services that people actually need,
such as what?
Such as housing support, for instance,
Okay.
The provincial government in particular, I believe, could be and should be doing a lot more. Again, as we've seen within recent months, there was an announcement, for 222 units, and as we see, even just based on one of the most recent Auditor General reports on the state of public housing within the province, these figures for 222 units are only a drop in the bucket for actually what's needed, even within Jabuk, Halifax region alone. And so I think, again, the numbers would bear out that we need substantial investments to be made into public housing in particular. Again, the distinction between that and affordable housing, I think, is quite fast.
And so how were you received at the Board of Police Commissioners? Was it basically just a presentation? Was there a Q&A? What specifically did you want to relay specifically, if you didn't already go over that just now?
Well, police are supposed to be implemented, they're supposed to be implementing the recommendations found within a O'Brien report, which had come out within the last few years, that recommends that the police start collecting race-based data. And so my suggestion to the board was, again, that as we can already tell that a number of folks who are experiencing homelessness and who are being incarcerated are of disproportionate amount of which are of African and indigenous descent, that police as well are, again, we already know this anecdotally, but they're over criminalizing and over policing persons within these two communities as well.
I thought they did collect race-based data. I mean, we saw the street checks report. Wasn't that based off of police collected race-based data, or are you speaking about a different type of data?
Yeah, so the Wortley report, and again, I may not be the most familiar with these either of these two reports, but the Wortley report, from what I've understood, suggested that police, again, as we well know, are over policing within Black communities, and I think the street checks were, again, a disproportionate amount of street checks were being made onto persons of African descent.
Right. And this is a past report.
Yeah, so I think that from what I've understood, the Bryan report was more or less born through some of the findings of the Wortley report. And so these recommendations are all coming together in a sense that I believe will eventually get to the point where, again, what we already know, we're over-policing Black and brown people, a lot of whom are living in poverty. And so the investments could actually be made in terms of supporting these people within communities rather than criminalizing them. Because, again, from what I've understood, the numbers in which we spend in terms of public tax dollars to criminalize folks are significantly higher than what we spend in terms of providing provincial benefits.
We'll break some of that down, because you talked really, and we can't get into all the notes, but you broke down to me a lot of specific data where there's disparities there. What do you mean?
Yeah.
Can you elaborate on that a bit more?
Yeah, so all of this information is available on novascotia.ca's website. Two of the sources that I've used are from the income assistance rates for persons experiencing homelessness. Those are known as standard household rate essentials, and the correctional services key indicator reports. Again, all on novascotia.ca's website.
But specifically, there's a certain amount that is spent on, housing the average, I guess, incarcerated person. That's, I mean, you described it almost as a bit astronomical. You pointed to money that's spent on, people experiencing homelessness, or being a huge disparity there.
Yeah, that's right. So in terms of the income assistance rates for a person who is experiencing homelessness within the province, those rates are about $380 per month.
That's money that they receive.
That's the income assistance support rate, yes.
For
and
homeless people.
And that bears out to being less than $5,000 a year. And when I compare those figures to the cost of incarceration for an individual within the Nova Scotia Provincial Jail, those costs over the last few years, again, based on the corrections key indicator reports, have been over $100,000 per year. And so my suggestion would be
per incarcerated person.
Yes, per person, excuse me,
Right.
yes. So over $100,000 per year that we're spending to incarcerate a person, where this person otherwise might be experiencing homelessness. And I would suggest that the same point in time count that we'd spoken about earlier would suggest again that persons experiencing homelessness are a far higher degree of certainty being criminalized and incarcerated as well. Again, based on the 2022 point in time count, about 15% of persons surveyed on that day were considered housed within the Burnside Correctional Facility, meaning that they had been experiencing homelessness within 2 weeks of being incarcerated.
And I guess one of the things we talked about was that I said, a counter argument could be made that, well, if you increase the amount of income support you give to homeless people, that could, one could argue that could incentivize people to, just collect that money. Also, the argument could be made that if, you don't send people to jail, then that could, there's certain cost it's going to cost a certain amount to, keep people incarcerated. But if we don't incarcerate people, that could be dangerous. You don't buy those kind of arguments.
No, again, I think the numbers bear it out very clearly that people experiencing homelessness are over-criminalized and over-jailed. And so if we were to invest this money into public housing, as I understand maybe some of the concerns that people would have with giving it to folks directly, again, there are a lot of persons with addictions issues and a lot of mental health issues within persons experiencing homelessness. But if we just invest into housing first, which is a proven strategy, then I would suggest that we would see the numbers of persons being criminalized and again, overrepresented within the jail systems, that those numbers would dwindle, as they should.
So for people listening to what you're saying and, buying into what you're saying, and they want to maybe get more involved, how would the average person, get involved maybe in your organization or go about finding out more about, some of these things you're talking about?
Well, again, I can leave you with some of the information that I have,
Yeah.
but most of it, again, not all of it is publicly available data. If you look onto, again, novascotia.ca's website, you'll find through the Department of Community Services some of their going rates for income assistance and disability support, and as well through the Department of Justice. You might have to do a little bit of digging around, but eventually you'll find yourself onto the corrections department, and again, those figures are all available there. And one last thing I wanted to say is that, again, the government, as they're not collecting all of this data in terms of demographic data for public housing or DCS clientele, when we really see what investments are being made into communities for persons of African descent and or Indigenous descent, we're really seeing, again, that, as I suggested earlier, that these investments to over-criminalize and over-police these communities are a choice, and it's far too costly.
Thank you, Collins, for joining us.
Thank you so much.
Collins Ellison is the founder of a grassroots organization, Housing as a Human Right, here in Halifax. Remember to subscribe to this channel for more content like this. I'm Matthew Byard. We'll see you soon.